case of Cassandra Cantrell. Cassandra and Robert were twins. As children, Cassandra and Robert liked to tell each other scary stories in a room with the lights off. Robert was a talented storyteller. Cassandra always found Robert's stories interesting. In every story, Robert played a small but brave man. In addition, Cassandra and Robert also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together. Although their mother, Mary Smith, did not share Cassandra's passion to instill in her children a love of reading, she bought them many books about scary stories. Loving horror stories was the passion of the two siblings. They even collected figurines of villains and, as adults, seriously considered opening a horror-themed bookstore. Not long after, Cassandra's interest in horror movies brought her to the studio in 2004. She got a cameo role in a scary movie that, although it did not become popular, still made Robert envious of Cassandra. Robert began asking Cassandra to make him a deal. Robert asked Cassandra to give him a role in the movie she was filming. Cassandra readily agreed. Robert was happy, but he couldn't play even a supporting role in a soap opera. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, who had a crush on Cassandra since her first days in the movie. At the company Halloween party, Cassandra dressed as Velma from Scooby-Doo and Colin dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. During the party, Colin walked around with a glass of milk all evening, glaring at everyone just like his character did in the movie, and he also said a lot of quotes from the book. Finally, he stopped in front of Cassandra and said that her beauty made Colin want to destroy it. Cassandra thought it was a compliment, and they quickly started dating. But their relationship didn't last long, only a few months. Colin found another actress named Rebecca and began dating her, after which Colin and Rebecca began living together. One day, on August 25, 2020, Cassandra Connell suddenly disappeared. When her mother, Mary Smith, tried to contact her, she did not answer the phone. Mary went to report the incident to the police, and a search was quickly launched. After several days of searching, police found her car under the bridge. Also, the bad news was that the car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. There was no reason for Cassandra to appear here. This place was considered a homeless shelter where violence often occurred. Officers had to go through the neighborhood questioning many homeless people. But none of them had ever seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car appeared here. The detective participating in the search for Cassandra requested to locate Cassandra's cell phone. The signal showed the phone was in the water closest to the bridge, which meant detectives wouldn't be able to recover it and couldn't get the information they needed. To search more closely, a team of divers was about to search the coastal area for Cassandra. Before starting, they stood on the shore, picked up rocks, and threw them into the water to gauge the distance they could throw. Cassandra's mother mentioned that Cassandra's best phone case had rhinestones, making it easy to spot. The phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not. Mary expressed her grief, saying she had looked forward to being a grandmother soon and hadn't even had time to set up a crib for her expected grandchild, which was still in its box in the garage. She wondered what to do with it now, unknowingly providing important information for the investigation. According to statistics, many crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners. However, Mary Smith did not know who Cassandra's boyfriend was. Cassandra was not married and didn't seem to be in a relationship, yet she was pregnant. Mary had no information about him, despite knowing that Cassandra often spoke to someone on the phone. However, the phone number was not saved in Cassandra's phone book, and Mary couldn't recall the number. It's common for girls to confide in at least one friend about their relationships, especially when it comes to something as significant as pregnancy. The police found such a friend who revealed that Cassandra had reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, Colin Dudley. They had a brief relationship in 2004, but it was surprising that they rekindled their romance 15 years after breaking up. When Cassandra discovered she had been pregnant, she had hesitated to inform Colin. She had recalled an earlier conversation where he had expressed his disdain for having children, even expressing relief that his wife Rebecca had been infertile. Fearing a child would disrupt her relationship with Colin, Cassandra had kept her secret hidden. However, as her pregnancy had progressed, it had become more and more difficult to hide underneath the oversized clothes. To avoid arousing suspicion, Cassandra had stopped seeing Colin, even though she had known she couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. Cassandra decided it had been best to be honest with Colin. So she had told him over the phone that she had been pregnant with his child. Colin had been silent for a moment before replying that he had been happy about the news. Although his tone had seemed a bit off, Cassandra had believed he had truly felt happy. A detective visited Colin's house and knocked on the door. However, the person who had opened the door had been Rebecca, a detective who introduced herself as Colin's old friend and had asked to meet Colin. Without hesitation, Colin had stepped out from behind Rebecca, closed the door behind him, and walked out of the house with the detective. It had seemed like Colin had been expecting this conversation, even though the detective had yet to formally introduce himself. Colin told the detective that he appreciated the detectives for not revealing any information in front of Rebecca. Colin mentioned that he had heard about Cassandra's disappearance and found it strange, and said that he didn't know where she had gone. He explained that Cassandra had told him about a big argument with her brother, Robert. Colin had advised Cassandra to reconcile with Robert, but was unsure whether she would take his advice. The detective already knew about the fight between Cassandra and Robert, as Colin had explained to the detective that it had been just a small family misunderstanding, even though Robert had been extremely upset about it. On the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called Colin and said she wanted to talk, but he had refused because of his ego. Now, Colin blamed himself for her disappearance, believing that if he had met her that day, she might not have disappeared. Colin admitted to the detective that he had not been the nicest person, that he had been secretly dating Cassandra behind Rebecca's back for a long time, and expressed his belief that he would probably be punished for it in the other world. Colin also shared that when his father had passed away in 2014, he had a deep hatred for Rebecca. Rebecca often clashed with her father Colin, accusing him of not understanding her. However, sometimes it turned out that it was actually Rebecca who didn't understand her father. After Colin's father had passed away, Colin had wanted to fulfill one of his wishes. His father had been right about some things, and Colin decided to rekindle his relationship with Cassandra. This meant Colin had to end things with Rebecca. Therefore, for 5 years, Colin had lived a double life, which was extremely difficult. Colin constantly made excuses to come home late, telling Rebecca about fake business trips. Colin even bought a fishing rod even though he didn't like fishing. Colin would tell Rebecca that he was going to the lake when in reality he was visiting Cassandra. To make his lie more believable, he bought fish from the supermarket and Rebecca would cook it despite the fact that the smell of fish made him sick. Things took a surprising turn when Colin discovered that Cassandra was pregnant. Colin did not know who the father was, but Cassandra had confided in a close friend that it was Colin. Colin found this hard to believe. She wanted to have a family of her own with Colin, but this was something Colin could not provide for her. Colin assumed she had found someone else, and he assumed that was why Cassandra didn't want to see him anymore. The detective asked Colin when was the last time he had seen her. Colin honestly replied that he didn't remember, but it was probably about 3 or 4 months ago. Colin said that he had run into Cassandra at the mall, but only briefly because Rebecca was trying on clothes, and he had gotten tired of waiting, so he walked to the coffee shop. Colin asked the police officer one last time if they had any chance of finding Cassandra alive. The detective replied that they were doing everything they could and asked Colin to believe him. This was not the last time Colin saw the detective. Although Cassandra's phone was unusable, police had obtained her call records. It turned out that the person Cassandra had been calling frequently was Colin Dudley. Cassandra had called him often, even on the day she went missing. Police also received CCTV footage from the railway station near where Cassandra's abandoned car was found. The video showed a suspicious man standing out among passengers on the platform. He was wearing a long coat, gloves, and a scarf covering his face. A wide-brimmed hat obscured his eyes, making it impossible for police to see his face clearly. However, the detective noted that the man's gait reminded him of Colin Dudley. The hat was similar to the one Colin had worn at the party playing a character in the movie A Clockwork Orange. After tracking the suspect via CCTV, detectives observed him briefly entering a coffee shop, only to leave a few minutes later and head towards the parking lot. There, he got into his car and drove away. Even though his face was obscured the entire time, detectives were still able to write down the license plate number. A search warrant was then issued and a unit was dispatched to Colin Dudley's residence. During the search of Colin's home, detectives hoped that Cassandra was still alive. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house. However, in the wardrobe they find the hat that Colin had tried to hide. They then found a basement in his house. When the police went to the basement, they did not find Cassandra there and there was no evidence of a crime. However, the dog detected the smell of blood, became agitated and barked continuously. Colin insisted he did nothing illegal, claiming that the police had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to frame him and he claimed to be an innocent man. In search of more information, detectives interviewed Rebecca, who was shocked by the surprise search, the allegations against her husband, and the fact that she had been deceived for years. She said many things about Colin and her feelings, but when the detective asked if her husband was capable of murder, she thought for a long time and then answered no. The evidence against Colin was not enough to send him to prison, which angered Robert and Mary Smith. Later, Colin was called in again for questioning. This time, Colin claimed that he had an alibi to counter the charges against him. He said that at 6:30 a.m. on August 25th, he went to a hardware store and bought household cleaning chemicals and trash bags. The store's cameras confirmed this, but the purchase of large trash bags raised suspicions. In addition, Colin received a text message from Cassandra saying that Cassandra was coming to his house. Colin immediately deleted the message, but it was still stored in the mobile carrier's memory. The police took it from calls and text messages. According to cell phone signals, Colin and Cassandra had not left the house for several hours that morning. Colin turned off his phone but left Cassandra's phone on, possibly accidentally. As a result, police were able to track his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. Police suspect Colin may have used the cafe to clean up after the murder and wash up in the toilet. Colin drove to where he had discarded Cassandra's phone, which was the last location of Cassandra's cell phone signal. The police need to find Cassandra's body and seize the GPS tracking device on Colin's car to accurately track his route. This device provided new evidence in the case. Following Colin's trail the previous day, the police discovered a large trash can tied with a rope in a ravine in the forest. The ground around the bag was covered in blood, and it was clear to see what was inside. The case happened a month ago, so identifying the body was difficult. However, police were able to identify Cassandra's body thanks to a tattoo described in the search notes. Colin was arrested the same day and charged with murder. Forensic examination revealed that Cassandra's death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the trial, the police presented Colin Dudley's motive for committing the crime. However, due to a lack of witnesses and physical evidence, including the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that Colin was guilty. To resolve the case, the court offered Colin a plea deal stating that if he pleaded guilty, he would receive a reduced sentence. Colin accepted the deal and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and brother were deeply saddened by the outcome, as they still grappled with feelings of guilt for not having met Cassandra before her death. They are especially worried about the fact that Colin may one day be released from prison, free to live the rest of his life regardless of the crimes he has committed against their family. October 30th, 1983 in Drogheda, Ireland, Jillian McKean was born to parents George and Edith. A few years later, her parents took her and her brother Michael to Australia when her father was given a job in Perth. While there, she went to Bull Creek Primary School and then went on to study at Rossmoran High School. A friend from primary school said Jill had a huge passion for drama and was a natural entertainer. She was such a vivacious girl, really bright, bubbly, and so gorgeous. Her family would return to Ireland in 1996, where she would attend a grammar school and then later on a community college. Her parents returned to Perth in 2004, but she stayed in Ireland and attended University College Dublin, where she would ultimately obtain her Bachelor of Arts degree. During her time as a student, she worked in the student bars. It was also here that she met Tom Marr, and they soon started a relationship. Despite her small 5'1" frame, her big personality packed a huge punch. Bright and friendly, She had a huge impact on those she met. A childhood friend said, "Jill was just the most beautiful soul. She was nice to everyone she met and she wouldn't hurt a fly." In 2008, Jill and Tom married, and the following year they relocated to Australia. After settling in Melbourne, she began working for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, also known as ABC. Her job at ABC was as a unit coordinator and also included occasional on-air work at the 774 ABC Melbourne radio station. Her parents were again living in Perth, and she kept in regular contact with them too. The bond between her and her family remained strong. Her brother Michael moved back to Australia after living for a while in Canada. No matter where they were in the world, they always made time for each other. Jill went out with co-workers to the Brunswick Green Bar on Sydney Road. After staying there for a while, they moved on to Bar Etiquette, which was also located on Sydney Road. As the night began to wind down, at around 1:30 a.m. Jill decided it was time to leave, and so left the bar on foot to walk back home to the flat she shared with Tom. According to the Irish Independent, her brother had attempted to call her several times, but got no answer. Back at the flat, Tom woke up to realize she still hadn't come home, and so went out to search for her at around 4 a.m. After going everywhere he could think of without finding a trace of her, and with her still not answering her phone, he contacted the police. As the news that she was missing began to circulate, her colleagues at ABC took to Twitter to get the message out there. A Facebook page called Help Find Jill Ma was set up on the 23rd of September, and a poster campaign was launched to circulate as many images of her as possible. The scale of the search and media interest was huge. Within just 5 days of the Facebook page being launched, it had received over 100,000 likes. As the search continued on the 24th of September, an important discovery was made. In the laneway near Hope Street, Jill's bag was found. Hope Street was not far from where she lived with her husband. Following this, the police made an announcement that so many people had been dreading. They were handing the case over to the homicide squad. Her husband Tom also went before the media to talk about his wife's disappearance. The following day, officers had yet another breakthrough. An employee of the Duchess Boutique, a bridal shop on Sydney Road where she had been out with her friends, handed in some CCTV footage that was then released by Victoria Police. The recording was limited as it was filmed through the window, but it showed a man in a blue hoodie walking around outside the shop. Around 4 minutes later at 1:42 a.m., Jill could be seen on the footage talking to him and showing him her mobile phone. This was the last known sighting of Jill Ma. Following the uncovering of the CCTV footage, they decided to change tack. They were now looking for the man in the blue hoodie. They also checked her cell phone records, which showed that her phone had been moving down the freeway on the night she disappeared, meaning it must have been in a car. After checking the license plates of the cars caught on camera, the police came to a horrifying realization. Her phone was moving at the same time as a car that was registered to a well-known and dangerous sex offender. Adrian Ernest Bailey, aged 41, was arrested at his home in Coburg and was then taken into custody. He underwent hours of interviews and interrogation before he eventually confessed everything. Officers were stunned as he admitted to them he had strangled Jill with his bare hands in a lane just off Hope Street. 8 hours later at 10 p.m. on the 27th of September, he led officers to where her body had been left in a shallow grave on Black Hill Road. She was just a matter of weeks away from her 30th birthday. Following his arrest, his defense lawyer requested a suppression order be in place to ban the publishing of any potentially damaging material about him. This request was granted. The police also came to a horrifying realization. They found out that Bailey had actually been on parole when he had raped and murdered Jill. He had been jailed back in 2002 for 11 years after raping 5 prostitutes over a 6-month period. He served 8 years of his sentence before being released in 2010. His criminal history had began as an 18-year-old when he raped the 16-year-old girlfriend of his sister. In August 1990, just 1 month after he turned 19, he attempted to rape and threaten to kill a 17-year-old girl who he didn't know. And just 4 months after that, he attempted to rape a 16-year-old girl. She was hitchhiking and he abducted her in his car and drove out to a remote area before carrying out the attack. In 1991, He was sent to prison for these offenses after pleading guilty. He served just 22 months of a 5-year sentence. He would later admit that he had actually cheated the system and just gone through the motions of rehabilitation in prison in order to secure an early release. He had convinced them he was no longer a danger. He admitted this during the court appearance regarding the 16 counts of rape committed between September 2000 and March 2001. These were all committed against the 5 sex workers working in St. Kilda. On one of these occasions, he apologized to the victim before laughing at her, telling her he would do it again and then driving away. He pled guilty to all charges. These were the offenses he was on bail for when he murdered Jill Ma. Upon his release from prison in August 2011, the then 40-year-old Bailey spotted a man eating outside a cafe at around 1:30 a.m. Bailey proceeded to hurl abuse at the 20-year-old before punching him in the face, breaking his jaw and leaving him unconscious. When being interviewed by officers following his arrest for the rape and murder of Jill, he said, "And I say that in hope someone hears that and they don't ever let me out again. How many chances does a person need?" The father of 4 also said, "It really wasn't my intention to hurt her. You know that. I want to do the right thing. I'm going to go to jail for a long time. I hope they bring back the death penalty before I get sentenced. I have no life left. There's no excuses for this." Her family this week, it must have been hell. You know what I mean? I can't imagine how she felt, but I know how I felt. It's not nice, man, it's not nice. And all I thought was, what have I done? I don't know what else to say, man. I don't know what else to say. At 2 a.m. on the 28th of September, Bailey was charged with the rape and murder of Jill Marr, and an hour later had an out-of-sessions hearing that lasted for about 90 seconds. He was held on remand to await trial. The gravity of what he had done appeared to be weighing heavily on him as he attempted suicide while in custody. The one question that people wanted answered was why? Why had he taken the life of a stranger in the most brutal and savage way imaginable? He told a psychologist, Professor James Ogloff, that he had attempted to kiss and touch her outside of the Brunswick Laneway just off of Sydney Road. She responded to it by stepping back and then slapping him across the face. He told the psychologist that this response had enraged him, and he lost it after she'd rejected his advances. After the rape, she hit him with her mobile phone and then threatened to call the police. He responded by strangling her. He also said that after he realized she was no longer breathing, he sat in the laneway panic-stricken and crying, unsure as to what to do. He then drove home to get a shovel before returning to the crime scene. He dragged her body into his car and drove out to Ginsman South, where he dug the grave and attempted to bury her. When the news broke about what had happened to Jill Marr, everyone was devastated. Shortly after her body was found, the Australian flag at the ABC Southbank studios were flown at half-mast as a sign of respect. Part of a statement on the ABC website read, "Jill was a much-loved member of the local radio family. She was witty, intelligent, and great company. Her friends and workmates at the ABC will miss her greatly. Jill was an innocent victim, a young, vibrant woman with her whole life in front of her." Radio host John Fain also paid an emotional tribute to her live on air. As news began to spread on social media of her body being found, in just one day more than 600 messages of condolence had appeared on the Help Us Find Jill Marr Facebook page. Also that day, around 12 million Twitter timelines had referred to her. It wasn't just her immediate circle that were affected by the tragedy. The media reported that even inmates at the Melbourne Romance Centre were deeply affected, so much so that 40 of them attended a requiem mass in the prison chapel, led by the chaplain Father Joe Caddy, to pay their respects to Jill and honor her life. The shock and disbelief was palpable. Thousands of bouquets were being laid out in tribute to her. As she was a Roman Catholic, many were left outside a church near to where she had disappeared. A candlelight vigil was also held at the church to honor her memory. A major problem immediately after Bailey's arrest came when some began searching for him in the white pages. People found an A. Bailey, which listed his address and telephone number, and before long the number was being inundated with abusive phone calls. The problem was, this wasn't Adrian Bailey. It was a man called Andrew Bailey. After the case of mistaken identity came to light, the phone calls and harassment stopped when people realized they had got the wrong person. In her hometown of Drogheda, Ireland, a memorial service was held on the 28th of September at St. Oliver's Community College, with thousands in attendance. On the 30th of September, just 2 days after Jill's body was found, a Melbourne photographer, Philip Werner, organized a public march. He said he only expected around 100 people to turn up, but the response was massive. More than 30,000 people walked side by side along Sydney Road in memory of Jill. The themes of violence against women became talking points in the media too. After Bailey had been charged, various Facebook users began to create pages about the case. As some of them were openly hostile towards Bailey, the Victoria Police tried unsuccessfully to have the pages taken down. As a result of this, the Premier of Victoria suggested it might be necessary to reform the law so that social media coverage could not prejudice a potential jury. According to the Irish Independent, her husband Tom also backed these calls to have the posts in question removed. Facebook refused to remove the content leading to criticism from the Victoria Police Chief Commissioner, Ken Lay. He told Fairfax Radio that Facebook would not cooperate in removing the page and that he was seeking legal advice. Though social media has been enormously helpful in this investigation, it's also been very, very difficult. And we had cause to speak to Facebook over the weekend and ask them to take the particular site down, he said. Now, they've refused to do that. When you see the hatred that's incited by some of these sites, it is very much the antithesis of what we saw yesterday with the 30,000 people taking to the streets, saying, let's try and make this a safer and fairer community. The Reclaim the Night movement also organized a march on the 20th of October. The Reclaim the Night march aims to give women a voice and empower them to feel safe walking the streets at night, as well as highlight the issues of personal safety that many women find themselves trying to navigate on a daily basis. On the 4th of October, Jill Marr's private funeral service took place at Melbourne Faulkner Memorial Park. The family thanked the public again for their support and the condolences that they had been offered. Those in attendance included colleagues from ABC and police officers who were working on the case. The considerable media attention led to a special area for journalists to observe from while the funeral was taking place. As Jill still had family back in Ireland, the following day a formal memorial mass took place at St. Peter's Church in her hometown of Drogheda, with hundreds attending. The priest who had married her and Tom, Father Oliver Devine, presided over the mass. The whole town was brought to a standstill as people silently marched through the streets. Her uncle Michael was given countless books of condolence from passers-by. At a pre-committal hearing in January 2013, a 2-day committal case in the Melbourne Magistrates Court was scheduled to start on March 12, 2013. According to various news reports, Bailey intended to fight the charges against him. However, on April 5, 2013, he entered a plea of guilty to the rape and murder of Jill Ma. 21 days later, he was back in court to answer for several other sexual assaults in Melbourne, dating back to the year 2000. On these charges, he entered a plea of not guilty. Deputy Chief Magistrate Felicity Broughton also granted the defense's application to extend the existing suppression order banning the publication of damaging or potentially prejudicial material about him, with specific reference to the internet. On the 12th of June, Bailey appeared in court for a pre-sentence hearing. During this hearing, victim impact statements were read out from the Marr family and others, including Jill's supervisor from ABC, Catherine Hurley. The devastation caused was immeasurable, and it was also revealed in Catherine's speech that many of Jill's colleagues from work had had to seek counseling following her murder. Her widow, a Tom, said in a statement, "What was stolen from me on September 22, 2012 was love, my best friend and my entire world. I think of the waste of a brilliant mind and a beautiful soul. I am half a person because of this crime." Her brother Michael said, "I am in dreadful pain. I must carry on living a full life, yet I will never forget my sister." During this hearing, Bailey's lawyer, Saul Holt QC, said that Bailey understood he deserved a life sentence and that he was remorseful, saying, "There is a sense of true remorse and true empathy about what he has done." Part of Bailey's apology was also read out to the court. "I'd like to apologize for my actions. That night, I destroyed a precious life and many others." Prosecutors hit back at the claim that he was remorseful, arguing that as he had attempted to conceal the murder, that proved he wasn't sorry for his actions. During the meeting, the suppression order was also lifted by Justice Jeffrey Nettle, which allowed for Bailey's extensive history of rape and violence to be revealed and reported on. The courtroom was packed out and the public gallery was full at the Victoria Supreme Court. Adrian Ernest Bailey was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 35 years for the rape and murder of Jill Marr. When sentencing him, Justice Nettle said that Adrian Bailey was a sexual deviant who either killed Jill because she was threatening to call the police after being raped by him, or because the idea of taking her life aroused him. You were larger and stronger than she, and you used that physical advantage to dominate her. In effect, you dragged her off the streets late at night while she was peaceably going about her own business, within a stone's throw of her home. He also explained that had he not entered a plea of guilty, he would have received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Throughout his sentencing, stared down at the floor, only looking up once as his sentence was handed down. Outside the courthouse, Jill's devastated father George gave a statement. Following the high-profile case in June 2013, Victoria's parole laws underwent a massive overhaul, directly as a result of the murder of Jill Marr and other women being attacked and or killed by people on parole. Nearly 3 years earlier, another Melbourne woman, Elsa Corp, was attacked, stabbed and strangled in a South Melbourne motel by a convicted drug trafficker who, like Bailey, was also out on parole. Under the new laws which were introduced in the Victorian Parliament later that week, breaching parole would now be considered a separate offence. A breach of parole could mean breaking a curfew or breaching an alcohol ban. Police could also take formal action if parole was breached, and any violent offenders that committed a serious breach of their bail conditions could immediately be returned to prison. The new Premier of Victoria said in June 2013, "There is no doubt that the system failed Jill Marr. Under the changes we've already introduced, the offender would have been back in jail, not on the streets. Our actions are the minimum we can do to try and make sure this never ever happens again." The changes did not stop there. The High Court Justice Ian Callanan made recommendations to change the parole system. He highlighted 23 areas that required improvement. One such recommendation was that the paper system used to keep track of parolees was replaced by an electronic database. Another was that the part-time parole board be replaced with a full-time one, and that prisoners be required to prove they are at low risk of reoffending before they are released on bail. In September that year, it was revealed that Bailey had lodged an appeal against his sentence through the Victorian Legal Aid. The appeal argued that the minimum non-parole period was too long and that he hadn't taken perverted pleasure in murdering Jill, which was what Justice Nettle had said in his sentencing. In September, both the defense and prosecution argued their cases. On the 26th of September, after less than 10 minutes of deliberations, his appeal was dismissed. More controversy arose in November that year when a senior police sergeant with Victoria Police gave a talk about homicide at a fundraiser for the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia. During the talk, he showed a photo of Jill's body that had been taken at the crime scene. The detective apologized following an outcry and stated that the photograph had only been briefly displayed and that he had the backing of Jill's family to use it. It also emerged he had done this several times before. The police later apologized, calling the matter an unfortunate error. There was further controversy when a Catholic priest gave a talk at a primary school in Melbourne. He told the children that had Jill been more faith-filled, she would have been at home in bed and not walking down the street at night. He also said that she had been walking at 3 a.m., which was not correct. The Vicar General of the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, Greg Bennett, told the 3AW radio station that the Catholic Church apologized for the comments made by the priest, saying, "The Churchill Diocese certainly does not condone the comments made. The reference to Jill Marr in particular was offensive and inappropriate, and the people of Victoria and Ireland mourn her sad and tragic death." He also spoke to the priest in question, who acknowledged the offensiveness of his remarks and also apologized. The suppression order that was in place during his trial had also had far-reaching consequences. Australian TV and radio presenter Darren Hinch was ordered to pay a fine of $100,000 after he had attempted to reveal Bailey's long rap sheet of sexual offenses and rapes. This was in breach of the suppression order. He failed to pay the fine, and therefore, on January 17, 2014, the 69-year-old began serving a 50-day prison sentence. Almost 2 years after he had began his sentence for the rape and murder of Jill Marr, Bailey was found guilty of 3 more rapes committed before he had killed her. These 3 trials were all held separately between 2014 and 2015. His victims were 2 sex workers and a Dutch backpacker. In the case of the backpacker, he had pretended to be a good Samaritan, telling her she was being followed by a car in the Bayside suburb of St. Kilda as she walked home from the pub. Believing he was genuine, she accepted his offer of a lift and got into his car. He then drove her to an isolated spot where he brutally raped her. An e-fit was issued and she was able to identify him from a photo board. The survivors of all 3 rapes had come forward due to the high level of publicity following Jill's abduction and killing. By that point, he had now been convicted of sexual offenses against 12 different people. The systems of the Victoria Police were once again in the firing line. It emerged that Bailey's DNA had been obtained in 2001 after he had sexually assaulted another woman, but this DNA was not being held on the Victoria Police's DNA database. In April that year, the Victorian coroner announced plans to hold an inquest into Jill's death were no longer going to go ahead. Her family welcomed this news, saying all they wanted was closure. The non-profit organization Legacy Australia that helps provide support to servicemen and women and their families who were hurt or killed in action set up an online condolences book. By July 2015, more than 3,000 people had signed it, many saying they had never even met Jill but felt compelled to offer their thoughts and prayers. Bailey was sentenced to a further 18 years in custody, meaning his non-parole period was extended from 35 years to 43. The following month, on the 25th of June, he lodged an appeal against 2 out of the 3 convictions and the extended non-parole period. In the summer of 2016, Bailey lodged yet another appeal against one of his rape convictions and was given a 3-year reduction to his sentence. During the court proceedings, Bailey's lawyer explained that following psychological testing, he was not deemed to suffer from psychopathy, but rather he had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. His borderline personality disorder manifested itself in extreme and severe mood swings as well as poorly controlled anger. He also said that as a child he had suffered sexual abuse at the hands of an older female relative as well as physical abuse at the hands of his father. Despite his efforts to reduce his sentence, he will be in his 80s before he can even be considered for parole, and even if that happens, a parole board must be satisfied that he is no longer a danger to the public. In November 2020, Bailey's mother broke her silence to give an interview about her son's case. She explained that prior to Jill's murder, she tried to tell the police that she believed he was dangerous, and that the police had failed to heed her warning and take the appropriate action. Jill's devastated widow, a Tom, left Australia and returned to Ireland in August 2013. In November the following year, he made a trip back to Australia to promote the White Ribbon campaign aimed at stopping violence against women. In June 2013, he gave an interview with ABC and explained how he felt the justice system had let his wife down. He also wrote an essay for the White Ribbon website called The Danger of the Monster Myth, tackling the stereotypes that many have about sex offenders. Part of the essay reads, "We cannot separate these cases from one another, because doing so allows us to ignore the fact that all these crimes have exactly the same cause: violent men and the silence of non-violent men. We can only move past violence when we recognize how it is enabled, and by attributing it to the mental illness of a singular human being, we ignore its prevalence, its root causes, and the self-examination required to end the cycle. Male self-examination requires this courage, and we cannot end the pattern of men's violence against women without consciously breaking our silence. Although nothing can ever be done to ease the pain that has been caused. Jill's friends and family are determined that her and her impact will never be forgotten." Tom has said that following the death of his wife, the writings of Maya Angelou have been a source of peace and comfort, with the following in particular resonating with him. "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his early years. At the age of 20, he decided to serve his country and join the military. Christopher committed himself to protecting the peace and safety of his fellow citizens. Christopher was stationed at a military base near Marquette, where he met Terry O'Donnell, a young teacher from Iron River. They lived in the same area and would often see each other around town as they spent more time together. They remained close friends for many years, but Christopher eventually decided to leave the military and move to Traverse City. Despite the distance between them, they continued to communicate regularly, and in December 2012, Christopher asked Terry to take their relationship to the next level. Terry and Christopher have known each other for many years. They find they have a lot in common. They decide to live together. Terry and Christopher choose Iron River as the perfect place for them to settle down. Christopher finds a job at a factory that makes parts for military ships, where he becomes a supervisor. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began to arise in their relationship. Unfortunately, they didn't make an effort to work through their issues, and it became clear that their relationship was coming to an end. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to go their separate ways. Despite the breakup, they were able to part on good terms and remain friends. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher realized that he couldn't live in her house anymore, so he decided to rent his own house. He felt that the town he lived in was too small, and he wanted a more dynamic city. Christopher began applying for jobs in various locations, sending out his resume in search of a new job. In October 2014, Christopher found a job in Asheville, North Carolina. As Christopher settled into his new life in Asheville, he contacted Terry on October 14th, telling her that he would be taking the day off tomorrow and looking forward to meeting Terry for a walk. However, on October 15th, Christopher did not contact Terry as planned. Terry became worried and tried calling him for several days, but he did not answer. She even contacted their mutual friends. 10 days after Christopher went missing, Terry filed a police report. The police accepted the report and told Terry that Christopher had probably moved to a new job in North Carolina and that he had started a new life and wanted to contact old friends. To avoid speculation, investigators conducted a thorough investigation. They identified Christopher's new workplace and contacted an employee to gather information. However, surprisingly, they found out that Christopher had not shown up to work in 10 days. The police then suspected that he might have been involved in an accident given his frequent solo outdoor trips. The search for Christopher led investigators to the local woods where he was known to frequent. Trained search dogs were brought in to aid in the effort, but no signs of Christopher were found. Terry, concerned that Christopher may have been injured or in an accident, suggested searching his former apartment. The investigators agreed and visited the apartment where they were met with a scene of disarray. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the floor and closets were left open. Initially, they thought that Christopher might have simply been messy, but Terry disputed this, stating that Christopher was typically neat and organized. The detectives started to suspect a connection between the recent events and the crime. After investigating Christopher's home, they decided to expand their search. A thorough search of the neighborhood led them to find Christopher's car 8 miles outside Iron River near the city limits. The police found it unusual that the car was left there, suggesting it might have been abandoned unintentionally. After forcing open a door, they searched the interior and found nothing suspicious, only ordinary clothing. However, one of the officers noticed a small yellow piece of paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it. They decided to follow the route to see where it led. Although the paper did not specify an exact address, the directions were clear. According to Terry, Christopher, although familiar with the city of Iron River, did not know the local street names, so he wrote down the directions using landmarks such as bus stops and gas stations. Terry deduced from the detailed notes that this was Christopher's first time visiting the location. The detectives followed the route outlined on the paper, which led them to a nearby town and a specific house mentioned in Christopher's notes. When they arrived, they knocked on the door to gather information and Christopher's connection to the location. A man named Jason Cochran answered the door, and his wife Kelly was there. The police explained that they were investigating Christopher's disappearance and had found a lead pointing to this address. Terry, who worked with Christopher at the same factory, revealed that they were co-workers. She had tried to contact Christopher via text message in mid-October but had not received a response. Investigators found a note in Christopher's car that showed the route to Jason's house. Although confused, Jason and Kelly agreed to cooperate with the investigation. After a short interrogation without any further clues, the detectives left Jason Cochran's house. Detectives then interviewed Christopher's co-workers at the factory. A supervisor shared that Christopher had been having an affair with Kelly Cochran, which was an open secret among employees. This revelation sparked interest, leading investigators to re-question that Jason and Kelly. During reinterrogation, Kelly confessed to her relationship with Christopher. However, she claimed that she could not reveal this information earlier because her husband Jason was present. According to Kelly, Jason agreed to her affair. However, Christopher's colleagues disputed Kelly's story. They claimed that Jason did not approve of Kelly's affair. When Jason was later brought in for questioning, he completely denied approving of Kelly's affair. His strong objection to Kelly's infidelity aroused suspicion and made him a suspect. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance was ongoing, but the lack of concrete evidence made it impossible to determine whether Kelly was involved. As a result, Kelly and Jason were released from the police station. The case remained unsolved for 5 months. In March 2015, a new investigator, Detective Jeremy Ogden from the Hobart Police Department, took over the case. Jeremy Ogden began by thoroughly examining the Jason Cochran family's background. Kelly and Jason had met in high school and started living together soon after graduation. They had distinct personalities. Kelly was outgoing, sociable, and talkative, while Jason was quiet and reserved. He rarely initiated conversations, only responding to questions asked of him. Despite their differences, they decided to get married. After the wedding, they started a business together, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it provided a decent income for they. Jason handled most of the pool maintenance work, but the constant stress and physical strain took a toll on his health. He began to experience back problems and felt increasingly heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he could no longer continue running the business. Kelly then took over the responsibilities of running the business, hoping that Jason would soon recover and return to his duties. However, his condition continued to worsen, and medical treatments were not providing the desired relief. Kelly searched for alternative ways to help her husband recover. During her search, Kelly discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the plant was banned in their home state, making it inaccessible to them. To access the treatment, Kelly and Jason decided to relocate to Michigan, specifically Iron River Township, in 2014. Jason consulted his doctor and received a prescription for pain medication. Around the same time, in early 2014, Jason's wife, Kelly Cochran, started working at a factory that manufactured parts for U.S. warships. Kelly and Jason moved to the area. Kelly and Jason worked at the same factory where Christopher Reagan worked. Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This friendship was especially important to Christopher. After gathering evidence, prosecutors presented their case to a Michigan judge to obtain a search warrant for Kelly and Jason's home. The judge granted the warrant, and on March 6th, a team of investigators searched Kelly and Jason's home, carefully searching for any evidence related to Christopher's disappearance. The only significant discovery was a book written by Jason. He used a pseudonym in the world of video games. The title of the work was ordinary, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described the murder of the person who had harmed him. After reading the book, the detectives noticed a character who bore an uncanny resemblance to Christopher. This raised suspicions about Jason, leading them to wonder if he had been inspired by the real-life crimes he had committed. 3 weeks later, a second search of Jason's home was conducted. The police hoped to find crucial evidence that had been missed in the first search. However, when they arrived at the Jason's home, they found it empty with no cars in sight. Repeated attempts to knock on the door went unanswered. It was later discovered that Kelly and Jason had fled the state shortly after the initial search, moving to Indiana. Their sudden departure left investigators concerned. Michigan police, needing a DNA sample, asked Indiana police for help. Indiana police went to Jason's new home, where they had just moved. The investigation into Christopher Reagan's disappearance ran out of clues. Time passed, and on February 22, 2016, Hobart, Indiana, police received a frantic call from Kelly Cochran, who tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, Kelly was in a panic. It was clear that Jason was beyond saving. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning like fire, as if he had overheated. The doctors officially confirmed Jason's death. His body was then sent for a thorough forensic examination. Meanwhile, Kelly was handed over to a police patrol and taken to relatives who lived nearby. To piece together what happened, investigators thoroughly searched the Jason's new home. During the search, a police officer found a syringe at the foot of Jason in his wife's bed. Initially, investigators believed Jason's death was due to substance abuse. The medical examiner's report showed that Jason had multiple drugs in his system. Jason's death was due to strangulation, confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. The focus of the investigation then shifted to Kelly Cochran, who appeared to be connected to both crimes. She was now considered the prime suspect in not only Christopher's disappearance, but also her husband's murder. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was summoned to the police station to answer questions about her husband's death. Under direct questioning and pressure from investigators, Kelly denied any involvement in her husband's death and Christopher's disappearance. She claimed that Jason's death was due to a drug overdose. Months later, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to convict Kelly. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. Kelly informed Walter of Jason's death, who then contacted the police. Walter shared his insights with investigators, saying he did not believe Jason's death was caused by drugs. He claimed that Jason had used herbs to relieve his chronic back pain. In March of the previous year, Jason confided in Walter about his concerns. Jason and Kelly were asked to go to Indiana because the Iron River police suspected them of being involved in Christopher's disappearance. This had a significant impact on Jason, leading to depression. Walter observed the notable change in Jason's behavior, with Kelly increasingly taking control over his life. Jason appeared to be constantly anxious, and he began to avoid social gatherings as soon as Kelly returned from work. As the investigation progressed, this information became a vital link. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden devised a plan to pressure Kelly into revealing the truth about Jason's death. Walter, Jason's friend, was used as bait to lure Kelly into a trap. On March 12, 2016, Walter, under police surveillance and equipped with a listening device, called Kelly. He told her that Jason had given him a letter containing important information before his death, with the condition that it be sent to the police if anything happened to him. However, Kelly surprisingly asked Walter to drop the idea, which caught both Walter and the police off guard. Despite this development, the detective still lacked direct evidence to build a case. In the weeks following her initial questioning, Kelly was subjected to multiple interrogations by investigators trying to uncover the truth. Despite their efforts, she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, on April 26, 2016, it became apparent that Kelly Cochran had evaded the scrutiny of investigators and was on the loose. Detectives joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart to launch a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who had cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened by the news. He feared that Kelly might never be caught and could potentially harm him again. As the search for Kelly intensified, her phone went off, leading investigators to believe she was deliberately concealing her location. Kelly evaded police and fled to Wingo, Kentucky, over 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective and notified the local authorities to exercise extreme caution if they found Kelly. Police in Wingo identified Kelly at her cousin's house on April 28th. Understanding that she posed a potential danger and was prone to attempting to escape, officers rapidly proceeded to the residence, avoiding advance warnings that afternoon and detaining Kelly on site. During the interview, Kelly revealed new details. That Kelly was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to leave the city life behind to start over with him. On October 13, 2015, Jason discovered Kelly's infidelity. Jason made a dark pact. The adulterer was obliged to kill his lover if the affair was exposed. Kelly claimed she had never taken this pact seriously, thinking it was just a joke. However, Jason was resolute and warned Kelly that if she didn't fulfill her end of the bargain, he would take matters into his own hands. Despite her reservations, Kelly reluctantly helped Jason commit a heinous crime. The next evening, October 14, 2015, Christopher arrived at Kelly's house, eager to spend a romantic evening with Christopher while her husband was away. Kelly had planned a fun evening, complete with dinner and intimacy. Kelly and Christopher had dinner together and then went upstairs to the house. Then Jason suddenly appeared. Jason rushed into the bedroom holding a rifle. Christopher immediately realized that he was in danger. Without hesitation, Jason shot Christopher in the head, killing him. Jason and Kelly then dragged the body down to the basement, where they began to dismember it with a hacksaw. Jason and Kelly cut Christopher's limbs and head off his body and placed the remains in several garbage bags. They then dumped the bags in the woods near Crystal Falls. To avoid suspicion, they drove Christopher's car away from the house. Kelly and Jason thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence of the crime. Kelly was consumed by a deep-seated anger towards her husband, whom she blamed for ruining her chance at happiness with he she truly loved, Christopher. She couldn't forgive her husband for depriving her of the opportunity to be with him, and the pain and loss she felt lingered every day. Kelly's resentment towards her husband eventually turned to hatred, and she knew she could no longer live peacefully with him. An opportunity for revenge presented itself on February 22, 2016, when her husband complained of back pain. Kelly convinced him to let her give her an injection, but she deliberately gave him a dose that killed him. However, the medication didn't work as planned, and her husband was still breathing. Kelly then suffocated him by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. To ensure he was dead, she also squeezed his neck, which explained the bruises found on his body. After confessing to the crime, Kelly cooperated with the police to help them locate Christopher's remains. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden led a team to a remote area near Crystal Falls to search for Christopher's body. A canine unit picked up the scent and led the team to a small hill where they found a human skull with bullet holes indicating a homicide. The team believed they had discovered Christopher's remains. Further examination of the scene yielded additional evidence, including a .22 caliber bullet, a broken firearm. Dental records later confirmed the victim's identity. This breakthrough finally solved the case that had haunted investigators for 2 years. Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher and Jason Cochran in April 2016. On February 13, 2017, Kelly was brought to court in Michigan to face charges. The prosecutor argued that Kelly was the mastermind behind the crime and that she had planned and executed. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including Kelly's own confession, to support their case. However, Kelly told a different story. She claimed that her husband, Jason, was the one who had planned and committed the crime. According to Kelly, Jason was jealous and had been abusing her. On the day of the crime, Jason allegedly hid in the basement and surprised Kelly and Christopher, then shot Christopher in a fit of rage. Kelly also claimed that Jason had forced her to help him dismember the body by threatening to harm her. Despite Kelly's new version of events, the jury found her guilty of premeditated murder after deliberating for 3 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After being sentenced, Kelly Cochran was sent directly to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ionia, Michigan, where she is currently serving her sentence. A small Louisiana town called Independence, which is about an hour's drive north of New Orleans, is home to a number of historic sites. It is a close-knit community with just over 1,600 residents that values its rich history and Southern hospitality. The community is well known for its yearly Sicilian festival, which honors the Sicilian heritage of many of its citizens. Tourists who want to experience Louisiana's distinctive culture and history frequent the town as well. Our case today starts in this tiny, peaceful town named Independence. On March 31, 1989, Jamon Robinson was born in Independence, Louisiana. The only thing that is known for sure about Jamon's early years is that he had a sister named Chastity Jackson. Very little is known about Jamon's formative years. Also, information like the names of his parents or the schools he attended are still unknown. Despite the fact that little was known about Jaman, he and his sister were known to have had a unique bond that was unbreakable. They both counted on one another for love, support, and comfort as they grew up gradually in independence. Their bond soon grew stronger with time. According to those who knew Jamin, he was a sweet young man who was always beaming with happiness and spreading kindness wherever he went. His contagious smile and kind heart made an impression on everyone who came into contact with him. He was adored by his family and friends due to his kind nature and quiet demeanor. He also had a strong love for his family, who he cherished deeply. Jaman, however, was more complex than just a good-hearted person. He had a talent for drawing and was a gifted artist. His drawings showed off his creative prowess and ability to capture the beauty and life of the world around him. Jaman was also an active participant in his church community, giving his time and resources on a regular basis to help those in need. In addition to this, Jaman had a close friend named Monterey Page. Jaman and Monterey went to the same school and shared a neighborhood. The family of Jaman was also familiar with his friend, Monterey. The duo got along well despite Jaman being 4 years older. Jaman's days were without a doubt full of joy, love, and limitless possibilities. He had a full promising life ahead of him, and his plans and aspirations appeared to be quickly coming true. But just when they didn't expect it, things started to go south. For Jaman Robinson, July 23, 2010, began as any other day, totally unaware of his impending fate. He got out of bed and began his morning routine. Little did he know that as he went about his regular business of running errands and attending to duties, he was completing a series of actions that would ultimately result in his untimely death. He most likely would have chosen to spend the entire day inside his house rather than outside, if he had known what was going to happen on the night of that same day, just before 11 o'clock. The Independence Police Department received an emergency call. According to the panic caller, someone was reportedly found unconscious on Kemp Street near a roadside ditch. Although the caller urged the police to act quickly, it was unclear how long the person had been lying there. The on-duty police officers immediately sprung into action and sped as quickly as they could to the scene. The police were met by a terrifying sight when they arrived on the scene, near a roadside ditch. A young man who was barely holding on to life lay motionless, despite the fact that he had no obvious physical wounds or blood on him. It was obvious that he was in a terrible shape. The officers' thoughts began to run through their minds as they attempted to determine what might have happened to him. As there were no other indications of criminal activity in the area, they started to believe that the young man had been the victim of a hit-and-run driver. At that point, the police knew they had to act quickly to save his life because they didn't have much time. In the hopes that he would arrive at the hospital in time, they carefully loaded the young man into an awaiting ambulance with the aid of paramedics. They hurried to the Lawley Kemp Regional Medical Center while the sirens wailed. As soon as the young man got to the hospital, the medical staff stabilized him and evaluated his condition. The news regarding his health was not a good one. According to the doctors, he had multiple head wounds and his survival was in jeopardy. After realizing the seriousness of his condition, the doctors transferred the young man to St. Tammany Medical Center, one of the best hospitals in Louisiana. As the young man was being treated by the doctors and nurses, new details about him started to emerge. Surprisingly, Jaman Robinson was the person found, almost dead at the roadside. As soon as detectives learned of his identity, his family members were informed and they immediately traveled to the hospital to be by his side, their hearts heaving with fear and distress. Although they prayed and hoped for a miracle, as the hours passed, their worst fears came true. The doctors quickly prepared Jaman for surgery because of his critical condition. Jaman's recovery was slow and unsure despite the surgery's success. In order to provide him with the best care possible, the medical staff chose to transfer him to the New Orleans University Hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Jaman's health kept getting worse and his family's hopes started to dwindle. Although they clung to every last bit of hope, they knew deep down that they were in for a terrible fate. Jaman lost the battle on July 25, 2010, just 2 days after he was found along the road. His family was inconsolable. They found it hard to comprehend how tragically and abruptly he had been taken from them. The next day, after Jamin passed away, the Tangipahoa Parish Coroner's Office fixed a time for an autopsy to determine the cause of his fatal wounds. According to the examiner's findings, Jamon's death was caused by internal closed head injuries. The injuries also indicated that the car which hit him may have been moving slowly. This further complicated the situation. The quiet town of Independence was enveloped in a pall of sadness and confusion that fateful night as word of Jamon's tragic death spread. The Independence Police Department's detectives launched a thorough investigation into the incident right away. They were committed to solving the mysteries surrounding Jamon's tragic passing in an effort to uncover the truth. They started to painstakingly piece together everything that happened on that terrible night. The detectives were faced with a challenging task and unsure of where to begin. Jamon was possibly hit by a careless driver who left him for dead by the side of the road. Who was that person? What specifically had happened to Jamon that evening if it wasn't a hit-and-run incident? The detectives are burdened by these and many other questions. Detectives made an important finding as they looked into Jamon's death. It happened that Jamon's friend and neighbor, Monterey, was the one who had discovered Jamon lying by the side of the road. As soon as this information came to light, the police turned to Monterey for clarification. Hoping that his version of events would shed light on the actual events of that evening, the police were still no closer to cracking the case. Even after several rounds of interrogation with him, Jamon was buried shortly after. Many of his friends and loved ones came to the funeral. The investigation into Jamon's death persisted with new energy. Authorities even appealed to the general populace for assistance, pleading with anyone with information in the country to come forward. Each anniversary of his passing brought fresh sorrow, and the need for justice continued to be strong. Unfortunately, there were no real leads from the investigation. The case eventually went cold for some years. The investigation resumed sometime in 2017. But with regard to Jamon Robinson's case, the Independence Police Department once more came to a standstill. They were aware that they needed assistance in making progress in the case, because they had few resources and no leads. Out of desperation, they soon turned to the Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Office for help. The Sheriff's Office then intervened, bringing their knowledge to bear in an effort to solve the puzzle surrounding Jamon's tragic death. Detective Mike Sticker assumed control of the investigation around this time and started diligently assisting Independence Police Chief Frank Edwards. The two men and a number of other detectives pored over the case's information for hours on end, searching for any fresh leads that might lead to Jamon's justice. They once again turned to the public for assistance because they thought that the community held the key to solving the case. Particularly, Detective Frank was still holding out hope that someone would come forward as a result of hearing about the case being covered by the media. The breakthrough in Jamon's case came 6 long years later, in January 2023, when a mysterious witness came forward and revealed himself while maintaining anonymity. The witness felt compelled to confess after carrying a great deal of guilt for a long time. His account completely changed the course of the investigation and was nothing short of dumbfounding. The witness claimed that Jamon's death had actually been brought on by someone who knew him, rather than the hit-and-run driver that had been initially suspected. Police were informed by the suspect that Jamon's friend, Monterey, was the murderer. Detectives have not yet revealed all the specifics of the witness's account, but they have finally made clear how serious Monterey's actions were. Detectives then started looking for him. On February 10, 2023, police finally made an arrest after tracking his whereabouts to Chambers County, Texas. Authorities decided to charge him as an adult up until 3 years ago, despite the fact that he was only 17 at the time of Jamon's death. According to Jimmy Travis, a sheriff of Tangipahoa Parish, once a person reaches the age of 17, they are considered an adult offender in the state of Louisiana. Second-degree murder, numerous counts of failure to appear in court, and 1 count of jumping bail were all brought against Monterey in court. As it turned out, Monterey's legal issues appeared to have begun much earlier than when he was named a suspect in Jamon's killing. Back in November 16, 2021, he had previously been detained and had admitted guilt to several drug-related charges. He was required to wear an ankle monitor at the time and show up again for sentencing on November 19th. Montree chose to flee to Chambers County, Texas, in defiance of the court's order, and he also falsely cut off his ankle monitor. The community was shocked to learn of Montree's arrest for the murder of Jamon, especially Jamon's bereaved family. They initially found it hard to believe that their son's best friend was to blame for his tragic death. But as reality set in, a sense of relief overcame them. The rest of the neighborhood also had a difficult time accepting the case's actual facts. People were shocked by the betrayal and questioned how something so disheartening could occur between two friends. There were many who were left with unanswered questions and unease. But most importantly, there was a general expectation that this would provide resolution for all parties involved. Montree pleaded guilty to several charges in the drug-related case on February 27, 2023, and was given a 90-year prison term. He is currently awaiting trial for Jamon's murder as well. Jamon's death was finally solved after a protracted investigation thanks to the persistence of law enforcement and the bravery of a witness who came forward. Jamon's family and the surrounding area can now find closure and start the healing process, even though nothing can bring Jamon back. What do you think would have happened if the witness hadn't come forward to reveal that Jamon was actually not a victim of a hit and run and was murdered by his friend Montree? The case of Shiel Cochran. Shiel Cochran grew up on the west side of Manhattan. Shelley's life was marked by a love of learning and academic excellence, earning a degree in wealth management. This degree opened the door to a successful career in Swiss banking. Shiel's career flourished and she became skilled at managing multimillion-dollar portfolios for her clients. However, despite her professional success in financial security, Shiel felt unfulfilled. She longed to start a family of her own and become a mother. In an effort to change her circumstances, Shiel attended a Jewish singles event in February 1998, where she met a 26-year-old man named Rod Cochran, who also worked in the banking sector. Shiel and Rod were a young couple with many similar interests and ambitions. Their relationship developed quickly despite their significant age difference. They spent all their time together and then decided to get married, feeling that everything was just right. Some people thought they were rushing into marriage, but for Shiel and Rod, it was perfect. They had two beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and their family was complete. However, their happy life was shattered on New Year's Eve 2009 when she died in a tragic accident. At first, the police thought it was just a freak accident. On December 30th, 2009, two police officers were finishing their night shift at a Manhattan police station. They received an emergency call from Rod Cochran, Shiel's husband, who had called in a panic to report that he had found Shiel in her bathtub, submerged in blood, and that she was dead. He followed the police's instructions to pull her out of the water and attempt to resuscitate her. However, it soon became clear that his efforts to save her life would not be successful. As Shiel's body was cold and motionless, Rod Cochran covered her with a blanket and waited for the police to arrive. Police quickly arrived and investigated the scene. Upon arrival, they assessed the situation and blocked off at downtown Manhattan Street. Initially, officers suspected that Shiel's death may have been a suicide. Inside the apartment, the police found scattered children's toys. Proceeding to the bathroom, they discovered the Shiel wrapped in a blanket by her husband. The bloody water in the tub and the wet floor indicated that Rod Cochran had recently pulled the body from the water. A bleeding wound on the back of Shiel's head was visible. Police found a torn hinge on the cabinet in the bathroom where Shiel died, suggesting she fell after losing her grip on the doorknob. Experts concluded there was no forced entry after checking around the house. The detective working the case decided to talk to the family members. During the interview, it was discovered that Shiel and Rod Cochran's 9-year-old daughter was the first to discover her mother's body. Traumatized and shocked by what she saw, she told the police what had happened. It turned out that the night before, she and her younger brother had slept in their mother's bed. Waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that her mother was not there, she went looking for her and stumbled upon the horrifying scene in the bathroom. She quickly called her father, Rod Cochran, who had recently separated from his mother and was downstairs. He rushed into the bathroom, pulled his wife's body out of the water, and called emergency services. Her account of the events matched Rod Cochran's. supporting the theory that her death was an accident. The police informed Shiel's family of the tragic event, leaving everyone in shock. An autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the following day. When the medical examiner contacted investigators to begin the examination, he was surprised to learn that this procedure would not take place, despite being necessary. This left the examiner confused. It was later discovered that a rabbi from Shiel's synagogue had intervened. The rabbi contacted an organization responsible for burying Orthodox Jews, who then asked the police for permission to enter the scene in accordance with the family's religious rites. The police granted permission and a team of rabbis arrived at the scene. They cleaned up the blood in the bathtub and prepared Shiel's body for burial in accordance with the family's beliefs. Unfortunately, this process destroyed all evidence and clues before they could be examined by the police forensic department. Orthodox Jewish tradition considers autopsies unacceptable because they involve defiling the body of the deceased. The rabbi quickly stepped in to support Shiel's grieving family, who were grateful for the rabbi's help. As a result, the family agreed to forego an autopsy and organize funeral arrangements. Shiel was buried within 24 hours, with hundreds of people attending to pay their respects. Shiel's parents questioned the cause of Shiel's death. Police told them that potential evidence had been destroyed during the cleanup. They thought that a fall in the bathtub would certainly have caused the accident. But the possibility of death from such an accident seemed unlikely. The family hired a private investigator to investigate the circumstances of her death and determine whether it was indeed an accident. The private investigator begins by going to the family home to talk to Shiel's relatives and learns that Shiel's marriage to Rod Coughlin is having major problems. Their marriage began to fall apart after their 10th wedding anniversary in 2008. Rod Coughlin frequently changed jobs and developed a gambling addiction, spending a lot of money on gambling. Shiel felt neglected because Rod Coughlin spent a lot of time playing video games. Shiel was also frustrated by the amount of money Rod Coughlin's family spent on his frequent trips, and he was unfaithful to her. Shiel, after discovering his email cheating, she decided to end their marriage and began the process of getting a religious divorce. However, the formal divorce process will take some time to complete. Although they are separated and experiencing strain in their relationship, they has tried to maintain their relationship for the sake of their children. Despite this effort, conflicts and disagreements between Shiel and Rod Coughlin continue to arise. Shiel had recently confided in her loved ones about her grievances with Rod Coughlin, characterizing him as aggressive and hot-tempered. She felt uneasy and monitored. The private detective suspected that Rod Coughlin might have been involved in his wife, Shiel's death due to the complexities in their marital life. To investigate further, the detective aimed to determine if a crime had occurred at the scene where Shiel's body was found. He planned to inspect her apartment, but the door was sealed, requiring him to obtain a court order to gain access. Upon arriving at the scene with New York police officers, the detective attempted to unlock the door with a provided key, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, Rod Coughlin appeared from his apartment, claiming he had heard a noise and came to investigate. When questioned by the police and the detective, Rod Coughlin took the key and easily opened the door. This raised suspicions. Had Rod Coughlin genuinely heard a noise, or was he deliberately keeping an eye on the situation? The detective searched the apartment for evidence of murder. Shiel's family said she was home on December 31st, but her phone was missing. A phone charger was found, but not the phone that he paid particular attention to the hinges, which investigators believed she had ripped off during a fall. The more he examined them, the more he suspected that, with Shiel's strength, ripping off hinges that were firmly attached to the cabinet was impossible. The detective discussed his findings with the police, trying to convince them that Shiel's death was not an accident, but a murder. However, the police remained unconvinced, citing a lack of evidence. Therefore, they decided to perform an autopsy to conclusively determine the cause of death. This decision caused a difficult debate with Shiel's family. The exhumation took place 2 weeks after Shiel had been buried. Her loved ones were deeply distressed by the decision. In the Jewish faith, exhumation is considered negative and many religious leaders oppose the practice. The family needed time to think about their next steps. They felt the need to find out the truth about their daughter's death, so they agreed to exhume her body. However, The exhumation process was difficult, so the family had to apply for a special order from the prosecutor's office. Even with the family's consent, they still had to make sure that all the necessary paperwork was completed. Once all the paperwork was completed, they proceeded with the exhumation and autopsy. The autopsy results showed that Shiel did not die from a fall, but from strangulation, which caused her to suffocate and break her neck. The official cause of Shiel's death was revised, and it was no longer considered an accident. Instead, it was officially ruled a murder. The detective's suspicions and efforts were vindicated. The autopsy results were instrumental in prompting the New York Police Department to reopen the investigation into Shiel's death. Detectives began scrutinizing new evidence, including phone records and bank statements. They also interviewed everyone who had interacted with Rod Coughlin and Shiel. The attorney shared information about Rod Coughlin and Shiel during the first divorce hearing in May 2009. Rod Coughlin claimed that he could not afford the money because he was unemployed, but the judge said that he had to give up gambling and electronics. In court, Rod Coughlin's true nature was exposed, and he continued to criticize Shiel, making false accusations about her lifestyle, finances, and behavior toward their son. He even called Shiel's workplace to defame her. In the subsequent divorce hearing on July 7, 2009, the court banned Rod Coughlin from spending time alone with the children, a ban that remained in place even after Shiel's death. The court also denied Rod Coughlin custody of the children and awarded custody to Rod Coughlin's parents through a social worker. This decision likely angered Rod Coughlin greatly. Police interviewed a former caregiver who had cared for Rod Coughlin's children before he fired her. It was discovered that on December 30th, Shiel had received an expensive keratin hair treatment that cost hundreds of dollars. The care instructions emphasized avoiding humidity in high temperatures for several days, essentially prohibiting baths or showers. Shiel's autopsy revealed no signs of bathing on the day of her death, leading investigators to speculate that she may not have taken a bath. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the building, which showed Rod Coughlin leaving his apartment at 4 a.m. on the day of the murder, dressed to go out. He returned a short time later. The building's security guard found this unusual, as Rod had never left the building that early. The security guard asked Rod Coughlin if he needed anything, but when he said no, Rod Coughlin returned with the chocolate bars and gave them to the security guard. Investigators believe that Rod Coughlin's actions were intentional to create an alibi, and as a result, he became the prime suspect. Shiel and Rod Coughlin were still married, which meant that absent a will or divorce, Rod Coughlin would inherit her estate, which was worth over $5 million. Additionally, on December 31, 2009, Shiel scheduled a meeting with her attorney to update her will and remove Rod Coughlin from the list of beneficiaries, which posed a significant threat to Rod Coughlin's rights and provided a clear motive for the crime. All of Shiel's assets were frozen in a safe deposit account. It is likely that Rod Coughlin knew about Shiel's plans to remove his name from her will, as he may have been monitoring her activities. A review of the surveillance footage revealed that Shiel had returned home at 8 p.m. the night before the crime, talking on her phone. However, the phone had gone missing after the crime. The investigators decided to conduct another search of the crime scene, and upon returning to the apartment, they quickly found Shiel's mobile phone lying on her bedside table, still connected to the charger. When questioned by the police, Rod Coughlin hired a lawyer, who advised him to remain silent. As a result, investigators had to continue searching for new evidence implicating Rod Coughlin. When they examined Rod Coughlin's phone records, they discovered frequent calls to the number of Deborah Holmes, a married woman with 3 children. 5 months before Shiel's murder, Rod Coughlin and Deborah met at a sickbow tournament and began a passionate affair. They often met at sickbow tournaments or played together online. Investigators saw an opportunity to gather information and decided to contact Deborah with a few questions. However, to their surprise, Deborah responded that her attorney had asked her not to cooperate. Faced with Deborah's refusal to speak, the police asked for the name of her attorney. The response revealed that Deborah and Rod Coughlin were the same attorney. As a last resort, the police searched Shiel's newly discovered phone for incriminating text messages or electronic communications between Rod and Deborah. All data had been completely erased by a professional. Even skilled programmers were unable to recover the deleted messages. Over time, it became clear that he had succeeded in evading justice. While his crimes may have been well executed, the rabbi's meticulous cleaning of the bathroom was a major factor in hampering the investigation. By removing all traces of blood and other evidence, they destroyed DNA, making it increasingly difficult for investigators to collect evidence. The case stalled because Rod Coughlin confessed to the crime, and a lack of evidence prevented the case from going to trial. 5 years have passed since the investigation into Shiel's death began, but no arrests have been made. Police have searched for clues and evidence of Rod Coughlin's involvement in Shiel's death for years, but to no avail. However, the case took a turn when Rod Coughlin's mistress, Deborah, came forward. She contacted the police, and they invited her to the station for questioning. Deborah had recently broken up with Rod Coughlin, which prompted her to contact the police. She shared information with the police that Rod Coughlin had conspired to gain custody of the children, but because he was a suspect in Shiel's death and did not have custody of the children, he could not access the money Shiel left behind. Rod Coughlin hatched a sinister plan to get his hands on Shiel's fortune. Rod Coughlin planned to manipulate his 15-year-old daughter into falsely accusing her grandfather, Rod Coughlin's father, of assaulting her. This would result in the grandfather being imprisoned and losing custody of his granddaughter, and Rod Coughlin would give his daughter a large sum of money upon completion of the mission. Meanwhile, Rod Coughlin had been secretly withdrawing funds from the only account he had access to, which was meant for his children's education. His parents discovered that he was misusing the money and were extremely unhappy with his lack of concern for his children's well-being. This led to a heated dispute between Rod Coughlin and his parents. Rod Coughlin's anger towards his parents escalated to the point where he considered harming them. In 2012, he confided in his lover, Deborah, about his plan to have his daughter poison his parents' tea with rat poison. He believed that since his daughter was a minor, she would receive a lighter sentence if caught. Following this, Rod Coughlin came up with several other schemes. He considered burning down his parents' house and trapping them inside by jamming the doors. Rod Coughlin also thought about arranging a fake marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, which would have forced her to give up part of her inheritance to him. The police were shocked by the details of Rod Coughlin's plans. Deborah secretly collected evidence, storing a large amount of data on hard drives. Deborah realized she was dealing with a psychopath, and she waited until after she broke up with Rod Coughlin to share the evidence with the police. The recordings she collected of Rod Coughlin's conversations with various people. The police now had to listen carefully to these recordings to find conclusive evidence. Deborah's contribution to the investigation was crucial. As the investigators analyzed the recordings, they made a surprising discovery. In a conversation with a friend he met through backgammon, Rod Coughlin casually mentioned that he had keys to Shiel's apartment and could enter it at any time. Investigators found that Rod Coughlin was plotting against his own daughter, planning to pin the responsibility for the Shiel's demise on her. Thanks to all the information gathered, the police finally had compelling evidence to charge Rod Coughlin with the demise of his wife. On November 1, 2015, Rod Coughlin was arrested. Shiel's family awaited the trial of their daughter's perpetrator, but victory was not assured. Rod Coughlin, while incarcerated, shared intimate details of his wife's murder with a fellow inmate. He even reenacted the strangulation, which matched the autopsy results. During the 7-week trial, the jury heard testimony about the heinous crimes he planned to commit, including murdering his wife, targeting his parents, and framing his own children. The jury was horrified by his cold-blooded nature. In March 2019, the court convicted Rod Coughlin of murdering his wife, Shiel. Although there was no direct eyewitness, the overwhelming evidence led to a life imprisonment sentence. With the possibility of parole after 25 years, Rod Coughlin will no longer pose a threat to his family or the people of New York. Karen Moore, a 52-year-old Caucasian woman from Davie, Florida, left her home at 7 p.m. on June 26, 2001, the day before her birthday, and she would never come back. Christina, her 8-year-old daughter, would return from summer camp the following day in honor of her mother's birthday, but her mother would not be there to welcome her home. Where might Karen have gone to? Was there any criminal activity surrounding her disappearance? Will she ever return? Christina had been looking for answers to these questions for 22 long years until now. Davie, a cozy suburban community in Florida's Broward County, offers the warmth of a close-knit neighborhood and the vitality of Western-themed attractions. Both tourists and locals find the city's year-round sunshine, mild weather, and the close proximity to beaches to be attractive features. Due to Davie's position as the center of several university campuses, it is well known for housing college students. Davie offers an abundance of recreational opportunities, high-quality education, and friendly neighborhood living. It is in this beautiful city that our case starts today. On June 27, 1948, Thomas Stewart Moore and Olga Charlotte Moore welcomed a daughter into the world. Karen Elizabeth Moore was the name they gave her. She had a sister named Pam as well. Growing up, Karen loved playing the piano, sailing, hiking, and cooking. Since she was a young girl, Karen has had a strong interest in travel. Nobody would have imagined that one day she would leave and never return. She earned her associate's in art degree in 1968 and her bachelor's in science with a nursing major in 1979. 53 years old Karen Elizabeth Moore and her husband were divorcing in 2001. She had a restraining order against him. Christina was their 8-year-old daughter, and Karen was granted full custody of her. Prior to her disappearance, Karen worked as a nurse at the Boca Raton retirement community, Edge Point Estates. And despite working full-time, she never wavered in her commitment to giving Christina a good upbringing. She made certain Christina had the most enjoyable years of her life. Christina recalls Karen as a loving mother as well, even though she worked as a nurse. Karen made out time to spend with Christina by taking her to the zoo and engaging in other activities. She simply wanted to give her daughter a happy and healthy childhood. However, the happy picture of this family would soon change into a sad one that was full of unanswered questions. On June 27, 2001, Karen was to turn 53 years old. To celebrate with her mother, Christina returned from her Girl Scout camp, but Karen wasn't home to welcome her. When Karen failed to pick her up, Christina knew that something was wrong. Karen was a nurse, so it was conceivable that she was preoccupied at the office. However, Karen was always available for her daughter and would have sent someone else to pick up Christina if she had to go to work. It was a very strange situation. The story that followed grew eerier by the hour as the day passed by. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 26, 2001, Karen paid her neighbor's son to mow her lawn, and that was the last time anyone had seen her. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, she left the house in her white 1999 Saturn. Nobody knew why she had stepped outside or where she might have gone. After waiting for hours and she still failed to show up at the house, Pam Kleiss, Karen's sister, called the police. Pam revealed that on the day Karen vanished, she had asked her ex-husband to pick up Christina from camp before she left for work. She then later had a quick conversation with her neighbor's son before leaving the house. Nobody knows what happened after these incidents. The following day, she had a job to report for. Keith Kreidel, the executive director at Edge Point Estates, the retirement community where Karen worked, mentioned Karen's 8 years of reliable and responsible work history. Because Karen cared so deeply about her work, if there was ever an urgent task, she would have notified the establishment. Everyone, including her, was aware of how much Christina meant to her. There was no question that Karen did not leave on her own accord. Was this merely a distressing accident, or was there another factor at work here? The search for Karen Moore was hampered by the police's limited resources and growing suspicions. Tracking her car was the first thing they needed to do. Karen was driving a white 1999 Saturn 4-door with a license plate due to CHU when she mysteriously vanished. On the back of her car was a sticker for Indiana State University. Every detail of this information was made available to the public. A woman soon reported seeing the same car in South Miami-Dade County. According to a tip given to Davie Police Department Detective James Franquiz, but the information was unconfirmed and unsupported by any other witnesses. In a last-ditch effort to move the case along, the police published a missing poster that described Karen's appearance. She was depicted on the posters as having brown hair, brown eyes, and glasses. She was described as being 5 feet, 4 inches tall. The police were searching for leads to find Karen's whereabouts, but were having no luck. Her home's initial inspection was a sufficient indicator of bad news. Her entire wardrobe, luggage, and even her phone were discovered at home. A closer inspection of her home revealed no indications of trespassing or forced entry. The detective surmised that Karen must have left the house voluntarily, but it was still unclear why she had left. Detective James Frankwis informed the public that Karen Moo's phone and financial records were being investigated by the police. He immediately ruled out theft or robbery when her bank account and credit card showed no activity. This implied that Karen was in a terrible situation. Since she still had all her necessities at home, she would have needed money to support herself right. The police were asked by Karen's family to use a helicopter to look for her, but they were unable to do so because they were in shoe of Karen's possible route. Karen Moore had completely disappeared without a trace. Despite the Moore family and the entire police department posting missing person posters with rewards, days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months and months turned into years as Karen's family waited for her to return. Years and years passed, but Karen never came back. Although Christina, her daughter, got married and had kids of her own, Karen's fate from that day remained a mystery. On January 6, 2023, Mike Sullivan and Michael Rodriguez, who were leading the Sunshine State sonar team in searching the nearby water bodies in Broward County, were joined by Britton Lockhart, a scuba diver and the owner of the YouTube channel Depths of History. They discovered a car in a Davie retention pond with the aid of cutting-edge sonar technology. The entire team realized they had struck car wheels in the water when Michael saw his underwater sonar system start to light up. They searched for the car for about 15 minutes before finding it. Britton dove to inspect it and discovered an open trunk and a license plate buried beneath 3 feet of muck. Although they were confident that they had discovered something significant, they were unsure of its specifics and whether it was connected to any prior cases. The Davie Police Department was immediately contacted by Britton Lockhart. Karen's mysterious disappearance occurred 22 years ago, but Davie police hadn't forgotten about her. They had to send the divers back into the water when they got to the scene the following day. The car was extricated from the water and taken for additional inspection. The vehicle Karen was driving when she vanished matched the description of the car. Karen's COS license plate was discovered to be covered in dust. It was a significant finding in this 22-year-old case. The puzzle was beginning to come together. 2 bones were discovered inside the vehicle, and it was later determined that Karen Moore had been there when it crashed into the lake. They at last learned what had happened to Karen Moore. Even though the entire search mission was broadcast live on YouTube, Lockhart and Rodriguez were unable to discuss the specifics of the case. The search teams and even the Moore family were barred from giving interviews about the case because the police suspected foul play. Even though the whats, hows, and whys of her mother's disappearance have been a mystery for 22 years, Christina has now received closure on the matter. Karen mysteriously vanished, leaving Christina in the custody of her family. There could never be a replacement for the warmth and closeness she experienced with her mother. In her early years, she experienced frequent ups and downs. She even spent some time in foster care. She would miss her mother during these times and pray that she would be found or come back to her. Every life moment that every little girl hopes and dreams, to have their mother with them. My own birthdays, when I got engaged and married, now I have 2 kids. They didn't get to know their grandmother, Christina heartbreakingly said in an interview. Without a doubt, Christina and her mother had a close relationship. She posted on TikTok in 2021, even after all these years, lamenting how she wished she had had a little more time with her mother. Christina finally learned the fate about her mother after 22 long years. Although Christina was unable to find all the answers to the questions that had troubled her for years, she was nonetheless grateful to the police and search teams for allowing her to bring Karen back home and allow her to be laid to rest in peace. The investigation into Karen Moore's disappearance is still active and ongoing. Davie police informed Fox News Digital via email that they had met with the detectives but were unable to comment further due to concerns that doing so might compromise the investigation's chances of success. The next round of pressing inquiries surfaced following the discovery of Karen's remains in the pond. What caused Karen to fall into the pond? What was the purpose of this crime? Assuming the police's suspicions are accurate, who was to blame for Christina and the Moore family's 22 years of suffering? There is still hope for Karen now that she has come home after 22 years. A partial success was achieved thanks to the police department's commitment and technological advancements in Sonos systems. Even though the answers currently seem hazy, Karen's justice could be right around the corner. Do not be afraid to speak up if you know anything. Your knowledge could be crucial to solving a long-standing mystery. Was Karen's death a result of an accident or something more nefarious? Case of Austin Haruff. Austin Malcolm Haruff, known by the nickname Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children and was born into a wealthy and respected medical family. His father was a successful dentist with many private clinics, and his mother was a leading pharmaceutical expert. The Haruff family lived in a spacious, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was 1.5 years old, his younger sister Haley was born, and the 2 siblings quickly became close. Austin's parents ensured that he and his younger sister received a good education and encouraged personal growth and creative pursuits. Austin excelled at school and had many interests outside of studying. He was passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and acting in an amateur theater group. He saw himself as a creative and ambitious person. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled extensively, discovering new places during their vacations. Austin described himself as a cheerful and optimistic person with a strong imagination who excelled in academics and sports through perseverance. However, Austin also admitted that he was very shy, which sometimes made it difficult for him to communicate with his peers. Austin's personal life was interrupted at the age of 13 when his parents decided to divorce. His father moved out of the family home and into a new home with his new partner, eventually marrying her. Meanwhile, Austin remained with his mother, who also found a new partner and married him within a year. Despite facing the emotional challenges of his parents' divorce, Austin continued to excel academically and athletically. Austin always dreamed of becoming a doctor, like his parents, to help others. He was a high-achieving student and was admired by many of his friends. Austin's physical transformation during his youth was remarkable. He grew to be 6 feet 2 inches tall, developed outstanding muscles, and became strong. Austin's charismatic smile and gentle demeanor gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he still struggled with social anxiety and shyness, which limited his ability to form relationships. In his personal diary, Austin wrote candidly about feeling isolated at school. His classmates called him a nerd and made fun of him, leaving Austin with few friends. Despite these difficulties, he still held out hope that his life would improve once he entered college. Austin looked forward to starting over, forging new relationships, and gaining independence from his parents. The important turning point came when Austin received news that he had been accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious 4-year medical program. This achievement promised to open the door to a successful and rewarding medical career, with the opportunity to continue his studies at any of the top medical schools in the country. Overjoyed by this news, Austin felt like his dream was finally within reach. As he prepared to enter this new chapter, his parents drove him to the college campus in late August. With excitement mixed with trepidation, Austin began his journey to becoming an independent adult, documenting his experiences in his first vlog. During his freshman year, Austin became deeply interested in bodybuilding and spent a significant amount of time in the gym, achieving notable results. He had developed strong muscles, but his success was partly due to steroid use. Austin had openly discussed steroid use in a YouTube vlog he had started in the spring of 2016. Austin had posted various videos to his channel, including discussions about sports and fitness, musical performances with his guitar, and philosophical musings on life. However, over time, his posts became increasingly disturbing. Austin began warning his followers about the dangers of steroids, claiming that they could cause serious mental health consequences and drive a person crazy. Austin had 2 distinct physical states, a normal state and a state he called crazy. Austin found it difficult to understand these contrasting aspects of himself. Austin had created videos where he spoke in different voices, as if he were other people. Sometimes, Austin's voice changed and he burst into tears for no apparent reason. Experts then reviewed Austin's posts and concluded that Austin was desperately seeking help in each post. As Austin struggled to connect with others during his studies, his blog had become his primary means of expressing himself. Over time, videos recorded him gradually becoming insane. His behavior became increasingly erratic, provocative, and aggressive. Some subscribers suspected he was using banned substances while recording, and they asked him about it in the comments section. Austin denied this, saying it was unhealthy and that he would never use banned substances. However, his behavior showed otherwise. One subscriber even speculated that Austin might have dissociative identity disorder. The sudden changes in Austin were not only manifested in behavior, but also in appearance. When he returned home for summer vacation, his mother and sister were shocked by the changes they witnessed. During his year-long separation, Austin had experienced significant physical changes, including significant muscle gain, but these changes were more than superficial. Austin's behavior became increasingly strange. He would say nonsense and claim he didn't need sleep. At first, his family did not take this seriously, but as night fell, they realized he was serious. Austin declared that he would guard the house and protect his family from unknown threats, and he kept his promise, wandering the hallways until morning. Every hour, he loudly checked on his mother and sister, reassuring them that they could sleep peacefully because he was guarding them. The next morning, his mother made him talk seriously and asked him if he had used drugs. Austin admitted that he had tried many different stimulants over the past year and described their effects on him. He even used a powerful synthetic drug that caused hallucinations, rage, and could be fatal if overdosed. However, he promised his mother that he had stopped using and was no longer in danger. Despite her concerns, Austin's mother did not seek help from professionals. As a pharmacist, she thought she could help her son herself. She gave him sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and sleep after a long, restless night. However, Austin only slept for a few hours before resuming his vigil, informing his family every hour that everything was quiet and under control. Over several weeks, Austin's behavior continued to deteriorate, but his mother refused to seek professional help from psychiatrists and did not even inform his father about the situation. On the morning of August 13th, Austin unexpectedly visited an old classmate who lived nearby. The classmate was stunned because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and Austin hadn't contacted her. When she asked why he came, explained that he had forgotten the year of his birth and was looking for answers. The confused classmate replied that it was 1996, after which Austin abruptly turned around and left without saying anything. Austin's behavior scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Austin's mother and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using drugs. This prompted the woman to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and express her concern that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day and, after speaking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for a medical examination, which Austin firmly refused. Austin's father then had a heartfelt conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send Austin for a mandatory examination and subsequent treatment at a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they couldn't do it in time. A troubling revelation followed. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach because of the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley accompany him to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed as if he were going to the mountains instead of the beach. He wore a thick athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him, they were silent at first, then burst into laughter. They teased him about his outfit and asked if he was okay. Austin became angry and shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he would prove it by threatening their lives. Austin's friend didn't take him seriously but stepped back just in case. Haley noticed Austin was on the edge of a breakdown and decided to talk to him to calm him down. In a private conversation, Austin confided to Harley that he believed he was half wild animal, immortal, and had superhuman strength. This frightened her, but she stayed calm to avoid provoking him. At the beach, Austin behaved normally. He joked, laughed, played volleyball, and had fun with his friends. As evening came, they all said goodbye and went their separate ways. Austin and Haley walked to a small restaurant near the coast to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by crossing a busy highway directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she chased after Austin, physically pulled him away, urging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't keep anyone waiting and quietly followed his sister. During dinner, Austin acted strangely again, getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he was afraid of someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his belief in his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin leaped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, pushed his father forcefully, and ran out of the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Austin walked several miles and eventually wandered into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. There, an open garage with bright lights caught his attention, and he headed towards it. This home belonged to an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkin Stevens. In the evenings, they loved barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, which they had set up like a living room. Married for over 25 years, they had 3 adult children who lived independently, allowing them to enjoy retirement and each other's company. That evening, John took their dog for a walk while Michelle prepared for their usual movie night. When Michelle noticed an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. However, the situation unexpectedly took a turn. Jeffrey Pfizer, the Stevens family neighbor who lived across the street, was on friendly terms with them. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside. When he looked into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw Austin near the garage. Jeffrey tried to pull Austin away, but Austin was overpoweringly strong and knocked Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, Austin stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens family house to draw Austin's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, Jeffrey headed to his own home. Once inside, Jeffrey realized Austin had not followed him but had returned to attack Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and stating that both he and his elderly neighbor had been injured. After contacting emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening closely. He eventually realized no one was outside his door. It seemed Austin had remained at Stephen family's house, and now strange animal-like noises resembling the growls of a wild beast could be heard along with screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive, but by then it was tragically too late. The sight that awaited them was horrifying. 2 officers approached the garage with weapons drawn, only to be halted in shock at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of Michelle Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she had suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further inside, in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground. John was reaching out, pleading for help with a strained voice. Above him, Austin was seemingly choking him. The officers demanded that Austin release the victim, threatening him with their guns. However, Austin showed no response, and firing was too risky due to the possibility of hitting both people. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did he see that Austin was not just assaulting but actually biting John's face, holding his head and neck firmly. Beneath John spread a vast pool of blood with a chunk of flesh missing from his left cheek, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. The officers shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog that was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto Austin's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented Austin long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, Austin claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Unfortunately, Michelle could not survive, and her husband John passed away on the way to the hospital due to severe blood loss from stabbed wounds and the trauma from the attack. Jeffrey, who reported the incident, survived, but he experienced permanent minor motor skill impairment in his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. Austin fell into a coma after mistakenly ingesting a substance from a garage bottle, thinking it was alcohol, which turned out to be a chemical. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach and spent several days in critical condition, but medical professionals ultimately saved him. Austin, the attacker, spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma. Upon regaining consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall having dinner at a restaurant and an argument with his father, after which he walked away. Austin described seeing a ghostly figure that guided him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until he saw a light in the distance. The light came from a lantern near Stephen family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue and setting out food. When Michelle saw him, she was startled and called for help. Austin admitted to hitting her several times and then pulled out a knife, claiming he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor named Jeffrey Fisher intervened, but Austin, thinking Jeffrey was a demon, attacked him with the knife. After Jeffrey ran to get help, Austin continued to assault the woman until she was lifeless. He then noticed a bottle, mistook it for alcohol, and drank about half of it. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. Austin claimed he couldn't remember what happened next, according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of strong drugs, which could explain his aggression and lack of sensitivity to pain. However, hospital tests showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol in his blood. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have experienced a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Experienced psychiatrists were tasked with determining the truth of this claim. The case of Austin Haruff attracted significant media attention due to its extreme brutality and ambiguity, both in the courtroom and psychiatric care. The children of the murdered couple, along with the relatives of the injured neighbor, believed that the young man was pretending to be insane and claiming memory loss to be declared incompetent and avoid harsh punishment. Most people following the case shared this belief. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, reported that Austin's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crime. It was suggested that Austin's mental health had worsened due to experimenting with various drugs, using steroids, and having trouble socializing with peers since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was not under the influence of any illegal substances or alcohol, as none were found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his violent behavior were another reason. During a court hearing, Austin's father disclosed that their family has a history of schizophrenia, and he worried that his son might have inherited this serious illness. Additionally, Austin was suspected of having clinical lycanthropy delusion, a rare disorder. This might explain why he acted like a wild animal and seemed immune to pain, although no psychiatrist confirmed this diagnosis. After receiving treatment, Austin was moved to jail, but the case remains unresolved. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers argue that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of John and Michelle and Jeffrey have expressed hopes in interviews that Austin will be deemed competent and sentenced to death for his terrible actions. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.